Spoilers and offensive content to come.
We are Carlos and Dave Anime Rave. We are the best anime review show on the entire interwebs. And today, we are going to be reviewing Season 1 of Castlevania Nocturne, a series that loosely adapts several games similar to what the previous Castlevania series did. In this case, we're adapting Rondo of Blood / Dracula X, with elements from a few surprising entries like Bloodlines on the Genesis and Harmony of Dissonance on the Game Boy Advance. But we'll talk about that, and we will explore and celebrate the differences between the source material and this canon as we discuss. Dave, what did you feel about Castlevania Nocturne, and do you think it is a worthy successor to the last series?
It's definitely a worthy successor. It's animated most times beautifully. There's a couple places there where maybe the animation could have been just a little bit better. I'm not going to insult it like a lot of people do on, or many people do on, say, like Twitter or whatever else. It doesn't look like a PowerPoint presentation, but it was obviously a stylistic choice that maybe I wouldn't have chosen.
The last series did that too, where some places have intentionally low frame rate. And I don't know if it's purely for effect or that's how they rendered it, and that's just a result of how they rendered it in animation, right? I don't know how animation goes. I think that the fights are still gorgeous, the shows in general are beautiful as sin, regardless of a few frame rate hiccups. So as long as they're not bothering me or taking me out of the show, it's not really going to be anything I take away points for.
The voice acting is spectacular.
As has always been the case with Castlevania.
Yes. I mean, everything from the main characters to a one line from some peasant that you never see again is delivered perfectly. The sound direction, both in the music and the voice acting, is just spot on.
It's really quite good. I'm quite enamored by it. There's so many moments in this show and the predecessor that the dialogue has just been spectacular. Almost every single thing Dracula said in the last series was just spot on. But that show kind of did a much more sympathetic, almost character study approach on Dracula, not the Satan analog resurrecting constantly person he was in the games, for example. And here we get a lot of that too. Olrox is one of the big standouts for me in the terms of the dialogue department because, his voice actor, an actual Native American, whose name I do not remember, he just has this stellar cadence and delivery for Olrox that just absolutely... Yeah, the dialogue is absolutely stellar in this show. I know this gets a lot of flack because there's a lot of... I'm not going to spend too much time addressing this. There's a lot of criticisms against this show online. To be quite frank, the vast majority of them stem from this not being exactly like the source material. And to me, that's a non-argument that I don't even think needs to be considered. Yep. Because source material need not be adapted strictly need not be adhered to strictly. Some adaptations do, and some don't. Objectively speaking, you don't gotta. Subjectively, it's really all up to what you want out of fiction. I generally like my adaptations of things to play with the idea of the source material and to try new things. That's what I prefer. So what I get as a longtime Castlevania player since the 80s, what I get from these series on Netflix is a new and interesting take. And I do see other criticisms that I kind of understand, like some people don't like the dialogue. They think it's very Marvel and DC movie-esque, and I understand that criticism at some level, but at the same time, I'm a big fan of dialogue and storytelling that balances levity with seriousness, like, say, what Futurama would do, for example. And that, I get that from these characters. Them dropping F-bombs in inopportune times, to me, it endears me to them. Whereas it angers some other people online. I've made fun of that before, like in the last video we did about Castlevania. Yes. I understand the criticism, but I like
to ignore.
It's not that. I like the dialogue. I like dialogue like this. I think you can do it cynically, like a lot of Marvel and DC properties do, or you can do it in a way that adds to the world you're trying to present and the storytelling you're trying to convey, like it does here in Castlevania. That is not going to be everyone's cup of tea, and I appreciate that. Like, I understand that argument more than it's not the games. If you want the games, just play the games and stop trying to stop insisting that every adaptation of a thing be exactly like it, because that's boring. That's dull. That all you're getting is something adapted to a format it wasn't made for, and that's why changes like this happen in the first place. Yeah, I was very enamored by it. I'm glad we're going to get a season 2 sooner rather than later, according to the announcements, because season 2 has officially been announced. Do you have any more impressions before we talk about how characters kind of differed? We can go over each character and talk about what you felt about them and how they compared to their game counterparts, which I would like to do.
I think that'd be the way to do this. Like,
I feel that's a better way to address the source material non-arguments than to just sling mud.
Yeah.
Is to show that there are differences and they're worth celebrating.
Yeah, like this... I came into this not knowing all that much about Richter or Maria. Like, obviously I'd seen them in games like Symphony of the Night, but I had never really gone through the game that Richter and Maria were from.
Yeah.
I knew of them, I knew the story, but let's face it, when you're talking the old Castlevania games, we're not talking the era of the Metroidvania stuff where they put a little bit more storyline into it. It was, you started with the whip, and you ended with the whip, whipping somebody. If you got a couple of lines in between, you were happy with the game. So, I mean, it's not like we've got a whole bunch of character material to go on. We don't have novels and mangas and everything else to have these things set. We have a dude with a whip kicking some monster ass. Okay, now that that's been said, let's start going through the characters.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Richter Belmont. Now, visually, his design is a lot like his original game costume with the prominent blue. Rondo of Blood was a TurboGrafx CD game, or the Japanese version of it, PC Engine CD. So less power than the Super Nintendo, but they had some CD music and sound effects to play with, and that definitely informed a lot of like color choices and whatnot. And I think Richter's vivid blue is what comes from this, right? Richter in the games is an interesting character because he's the first super badass Belmont that we meet. Like, we know that Trevor and Simon kick ass, but Richter's the one who had, on either version of the game, PC Engine or Super Nintendo, we have brief cutscenes to show just how much of a menace this 19-year-old hothead is. In the original Rondo of Blood, the opening stage is him fighting death on horseback. And the opening stage in both versions is him going through the town from Castlevania 2 that is on fire and beating the shit out of monsters. And they only set it on fire to try to kill Richter because they're that afraid of him. Game Richter is someone who is just very much, his badass is kind of a matter of course. It's just background info. This guy's badass. And we only really get some kind of character flaw when Symphony of the Night rolls around, where 5 years later, his desire to remain at the top and be the best hunter forever is what the priest Shaft uses to take over his mind. He's able to overcome it, but there was a darkness in Richter's mind. So much so that after he retired, Belmonts couldn't hold the whip again until 1999. That's why there are no Belmonts playable in the games between Richter and Julius. Because for some reason, the whip had to stay away from them because of whatever weakness Richter showed.
Okay.
So his legacy is one of great strength and victory, but also a bit of a downfall. We get that a little bit in the series. We get a Richter who is conflicted. We get a Richter who is trying to be this hothead kid. I kill vampires. Who's fucking next? He says this line. Yep. And he did that after doing his 1,000 Blades item crush, which was slightly alluded to. He throws it at less of a machine gun pace than in the games, but I mean, you know, they're trying to animate it a little more realistically, right? And we get a Richter who is still very haunted by the death of his mother at the hands of Olrox. A Richter who did run away in episode 4 in a scene that I know a lot of people didn't really like, is seeing Richter run the fuck away from his friends after warning them they had to go and basically leaving them, right? And I am a fan of character flaws in main characters, but what did you think of that scene? What did you think of Richter's flaws as we see them and his eventual overcoming of them?
I thought it was perfect. It's the same thing how in Castlevania Season 1 and even into kind of Season 2, Trevor is kind of fighting his alcoholism. His, I just don't care about the world anymore.
There is an indifference to him.
Yeah, but he gets over that. This is... Like, I bought Richter acting like that simply because, I mean, this is a kid that is emotionally scarred and never had a chance to really face that fear. And then all of a sudden, you know, the monster in your closet is right in front of you and you got to get out of the room. You got to run. So I bought it. It made sense for this little kid who has grown up to have this innate fear of the big bad monster that killed his mommy and then let him go.
I think some people... I know there were some complaints that, Annette kind of judged him for it, and we'll talk about Annette in a moment.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to note that Maria and Tara didn't judge him for that.
No!
When he came back, he was welcomed with open arms. And even Annette, after communing with her mentor and ancestors, who told her, no, people run sometimes, realized her mistake. Maria and Tara probably would need many limbs worth of fingers to count the number of times they've relied on Richter and been saved by him. And they would only need one finger to count the number of times he's let them down. And it was a moment of personal weakness, which we all have. Every hero has this. Luke Skywalker had this. Every Belmont in the history of Belmont there are some games where a Belmont's weakness is front and center. Not just Symphony of the Night, either. This comes up in other games. Look up the Game Boy games with Christopher Belmont having to save his brainwashed son, for example, as another example of a Belmont who has a personal failing.
Now, I do think that they could have, in a single line, have diffused a lot of these complainers. Because if they had said, if after he had run and everything else, and Annette was freaking out, if Tara had mentioned a single line of, how many nights Richter had woken up, remembering Olrox killing his mom, it's alluded to by Richter that he, Olrox has always been on his mind. And that makes sense, but they could have dropped a line or two to know that, Tara and Maria have seen all that.
I don't think that would have changed Annette's mind. I don't even think Annette's reaction is wrong, and we'll get to her in a moment. I just, it's tough to see your hero in a story have a failing, but it's also necessary because that's what makes their strengths and their victories all the sweeter, I think. And I think a lot of people just didn't like the fact that Richter ran home.
Well,
and I get that.
I didn't so much mean that Annette would have easily forgiven Richter on that. I'm literally talking to people that had a hard time with that. They don't always catch on to the subtleties of the trauma certain characters have been through. So maybe if Tara or Maria had said lines like that, to have made it very clear that they have lived with Richter all these years and seen the trauma he has been going through. Maybe the complainers might have been kind of slapped in the face with, hey, dude's been through some trauma. Come on, wake up.
I think some people like that are going to complain no matter what. And I don't want things to get spelled out too much.
Well, and there is that too. You can't... And again, I'm saying slapping these guys in the face with, hey, he's been through some trauma, but...
No, you're talking metaphorically, of course. That's the thing. We're not advocating any kind of harm or nothing.
Exactly.
I guess while we're talking about Annette, let's talk about Annette. Now, in the games, Annette is almost a footnote. Annette is Richter's fiancée and wife in the games, and that's literally...
Yeah.
I think You rescue her in Rondo and Dracula X. I think she has all of 2 lines between both games. And I think that's her whole character. It's important to note that her name in the games is Annette Renard. She is actually in the games Maria's sister.
Mm-hmm.
So much so that before we learned Tara's name, I thought she was Annette, actually.
Yeah.
Now, Annette was not a spellcaster, a fighter, or anything like that. She is simply Richter's fiancée/wife. That's her whole character. They reimagined Annette in the show to be a Haitian slave turned freedom fighter from the island of Saint-Domingue. Saint-Domingue, I don't know how you pronounce that properly, which was a real-life island with plantations where the slaves did rebel. This is a real-world incident in this setting. Speaking of which, to quickly address that, the French Revolution is what is the background setting to this and various world events around it. I mentioned last time that the French Revolution is mentioned in the game's manuals, but it's a backdrop. I was actually wrong. I went to look up the manuals for both Dracula X and the collection, which are the only English manuals we have.
Yeah.
No, the French Revolution isn't even mentioned.
Okay.
They just happen to use it as a backdrop because it happened at the same time, which I actually completely agree with.
Yeah.
Again, adaptations and new takes on things. So Annette was kind of reimagined as from, this nobody character who was just a footnote in the original games to someone with a lot more backstory who's approaching the whole vampire thing from a completely different perspective. And I know sometimes when characters are reimagined as not their original skin color or personality, that sometimes it's being done as tokenism. I understand that. Certainly we've seen examples of that in American animation and actually in all animation and in films and whatnot. But I don't think that's really the case with Annette. I think Annette was an interesting reimagining of a character to kind of thrust her into the more important setting that this version of Rondo, if you will, it's not just set in Dracula's castle. We have a more worldwide setting going on, and we have a character who comes from a different place on a mission to stop the vampire messiah.
Mm-hmm.
And I really enjoyed her character. I like that she is also a headstrong kid. She's known Richter for all of 2 minutes, so of course if Richter runs, she doesn't have that context that he's actually a brave hero who's only ran this one time. So I get why she's pissed. She also watched her mother die, and she couldn't run away from it. She was on an island. We got to see her go through some pretty hard trials and tribulations watching what happened to Edouard. And we did see her commune with her mentor and her ancestors. She got revenge on Vaublanc, the slave owner vampire who tormented her. We got to see her, when she's talking to her mentor, get told that sometimes people ran because despite getting her revenge, we know she hasn't dealt with her trauma either.
Yeah.
She came around to Richter pretty quick when he came back because, I like to think that these are understanding people and they're on the same side. And it helps that she has just a really cool power set.
Yeah.
She's basically Edward Elric.
Yeah, no, I really like what they did with her. It was sad when Edouard got turned into a night beast.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that we're seeing that night beasts can still retain a lot of their humanity is a very interesting turn.
Yeah. We knew this before to an extent. We know that Isaac attempted to humanize some of his night creatures back in the original series, and that's the lore that this is based off the old Netflix series.
Yeah.
The fact that in the games, Forge Masters were mentioned in exactly one game, Curse of Darkness, and never again. So the idea that this series decided to keeping the Forge Masters in lore and playing with the idea that a turned night creature can still have their humanity, it's very fascinating.
It is.
Mm-hmm. Do you have more to say on Annette?
No, I like her character. I like what they did with her. And yeah, it's the way to change a character and bring it into a new story.
I like her visual design a lot, and if there ever is a Harmony of Despair sequel, I would actually like to see her in it. I know she's not a game character, and I don't need a Castlevania game made with the series, But in some non-canon fun games,
Yes.
I think she has a cool design and power set that would work in that.
Absolutely.
Maria. We need to talk about Maria Renard because she was the other Rondo of Blood playable character. She had double jumps. She could shoot animals. I'm going to be honest with you, Dave. When this was announced, I was not expecting Maria to even make it into it. I thought they were going to leave her out just like Grant the Nasty because she's kind of this silly, childish character who is there partly for comic relief and then later in Symphony of the Night, eye candy. So I thought they weren't even going to include her. And to my surprise, not only did they keep her, but they made her this outspoken revolutionary, which completely fits her character in the various games where she's this, like, outspoken defender of justice type, right?
Yeah.
They give her a cool outfit based off her Dracula X collection design, which absolutely works in the context of this whole show. And they gave her an interesting family situation with Tara as her mom and the abbot as her father. Spoilers, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
They animate her fighting beautifully.
Yes.
Like
and they didn't give her double Ds.
No, they didn't need to make her the titty bomb that she's always been in the
No.
games. And here's the thing, I don't mind fan service. That would have been distracting on
It would
Maria
have been. It would have been
in this
wrong.
context. Like, leave this sweet kid alone, you know? Like, I was impressed with how well they animated, like, her creatures. Like the fact that they animated her turtle blocking attacks. I'm like, wow, they made that actually look right.
Yeah.
And the Thunder Kitty biting vampires' arms off and stuff. The only one we're missing is the dragon. And I'm sure we're going to get that in a future season.
Yeah, like, I liked how she mourned over her summoned creature when it got killed.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, that was something that wasn't in the games. You know, she just summoned her monsters, they came out, did a hit, and then they went back away. It's interesting seeing that her summons could be hurt and killed, but yet she could still summon more, but yet she still felt something for them.
It's interesting she doesn't really know where this power comes from either. And these are actually the 4 beasts of Chinese lore that she's summoning, like the Suzaku, the Genbu, and all them. So it'll be interesting to see if that actually factors in the future, if she learns from some Asian text or an Asian character that her power is actually weird and ancient and mystical, right? Mm-hmm. That'd be kind of cool. But yeah, Maria, super well done. And I wasn't expecting her to be in this show at all. So I'm over the moon that she was done well. She
is, as many revolutionaries can be. She definitely had a big helping of naivete.
Yeah, no, completely. She thought the worst of a lot of people and couldn't see the nuance in her actions, right?
And thought a little bit too highly. She also saw the positive in too many people.
So,
okay. Like, when she willingly went back to the church to try and save her father.
Uh-huh.
I kind of groaned at that. I got it within that aspect of the character, but I'm like, oh, come on, you're not going with this trope, are you?
We're going to talk about the abbot because he's a complex character.
He is, thankfully.
Poor Maria has one evil parent and now a second evil parent by force.
Yeah.
So she's going to have to school Richter and Annette on some parenting, like parental trauma.
I don't really think that Tara, by that nature, is evil.
Oh, we'll see. She was sopping up that blood that blood was clearly some kind of fucking foie gras to her. Because she was sopping it up willingly by the end. But we're going to see the nature of the transformation, how much of her is left in there, right?
She was being turned into a pure vampire. That's the problem.
Yeah. So let's talk about, you want to talk about Olrox next?
Let's get to Olrox after we get past Drolta there.
Okay. If we're going to talk about Drolta, we need to talk about Erzsébet Bathory, because believe it or not, these characters are taken from a plot point in a game.
Yeah.
The game is Castlevania Bloodlines on the Sega Genesis, which takes place in the 1900s. In fact, the game Portrait of Ruin was a sequel to that game. In Bloodlines, you control John Morris, who is Jonathan Morris's father, and Eric Lacard, who is actually in Portrait of Ruin as a ghost. You save his daughters.
Yeah.
Now, in Bloodlines, the big plot line is that Elizabeth Bathory, which was based off the real-life figure Elizabeth Bathory, and her assistant, Drolta Swentes, who is an old crone hag in the games, were trying to revive Dracula. That's where these characters came from, basically. Well, Elizabeth Bathory is based off the real Elizabeth Bathory, who tortured girls mercilessly because she thought drinking and bathing in their blood would make her immortal.
Yep.
And Drolta Swentes is a reimagining of Drolta from Bloodlines as her dragon, with a touch of the succubus from Symphony of the Night, because she was using like the succubus's wing needles and shit against Richter in the final church battle scene.
And got killed by Alucard, just like in Symphony of the Night.
Just like the succubus did.
Yep.
Now, Drolta is just like this. She's this character who drips menace and arrogance throughout her appearance. She's also wearing a different outfit every time we see her, which I definitely appreciate. Some people were arguing that her outfits don't make sense for the time. I would argue, who cares? It's vampires. And, like, she definitely fit the role of the evil dragon who just enjoys her job a little too much, and it's probably a good thing she got killed when she did.
Yeah.
Because she was going to be a problem otherwise. I do think Richter had her beat before Elizabeth showed up to save her, but it's definitely an interesting take on the succubus from Symphony of the Night. Elizabeth herself is interesting because they're doing a combination of Elizabeth Bathory, but also the god Sekhmet. She's very tall, like Dracula was. She actually reminds me of a sorceress from Final Fantasy VIII. You remember the sorceress Adele, who had the very masculine body? She reminds me of that character, but with a feminine body, but still tall and brutal, right?
Yeah.
I think the jury's still out on Elizabeth. She's clearly evil. She's clearly kind of comic book evil, as opposed to, say, the Abbot or Olrox, who have more nuance to their character. So the jury's out to see if she ends up being a worthy villain, or maybe if she even gets supplanted as a villain. I have a theory about that. What were your takes on these two characters?
Well, I like her look. Her look was good. Whenever she was on the screen...
We're talking about Elizabeth or Drolta?
Elizabeth.
Okay.
I mean, whenever she was on the screen, she commanded the scene. It was... Everybody had no choice but to, be dominated by her. Even to the point where when she was given a human to dance around with and suck on her blood, I thought, well, she's being used as a blood bank, obviously, but she wasn't going far enough to either turn her or kill her. It was always just, sweet little kisses of blood and then moving on. And in a lot of cases, her blood donor there was into it, which was kind of weird. I'm
going to chalk that up to the blood loss.
Well, blood loss, but I think there was also just a little bit of arousal going on there as well.
It could be. It could be that whole vampire myth in some vampire lore where the bite is pleasurable. Yeah.
It just seemed like it, because every time that she go back for another sip, the woman wasn't, trying to run away or anything else. She was getting right into it. Until, of course, she started losing consciousness from that sip. It was a complicated scene, to say the least. As far as her goal of a permanent solar eclipse, I mean, this is just as stupid for vampires as Dracula's plan of wiping out all of humanity. Except, at least with wiping out humanity, they still had animals to suck blood on, which was always, they were always complaining it was secondary to human blood. But, at least vampires wouldn't die out within a year, because no sun means no plants, nothing grows, humans die, no animals, your food source is gone. You are fucked. Ooh, permanent darkness, we can go wherever we want. Ma'am, I like to eat. It's short-sighted bullshit like that ruins plans.
Well, with Dracula in the original series, it was more about his revenge. He wasn't really thinking.
Oh,
And in the games, it was more about him just annihilating humanity no matter what. Whereas here, Erzsébet's goal seems to be to sow chaos and fear and discord. Dracula wanted to wipe out humanity. Erzsébet wants to torture humanity.
But even Dracula's generals were willing to, speak up and say, hey, I like a food source. Whereas under Erzsébet here, she doesn't have generals. She has fawning cult members.
I do think part of that is because she's promising to let them keep their higher status in the world. Or in Drolta's case, just playing to her innate want to sow wanton destruction.
And I can understand that. It's just, when you look at, you're in this French Revolution setting, and, you're talking about vampires having plantations of humans and everything else, wanting to have power over humans. The extinction of all life on the planet, including eventually your own, would have me have my hand up being like, can we talk about this?
I think partly that's why Olrox opposes her, because Olrox bowed but never bought into it. Right?
Yes. Quick thing on Drolta, I loved her look.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the moment she popped up, just like Erzsébet, she commanded, your attention when she was on screen. It was like, you knew there was a threat that just walked into the room, and there was no question who that threat was.
Mm-hmm.
So, and until Richter got his mojo back, I think a one-on-one between the two of them, Richter would have lost that hands down.
Mm-hmm. Oh no, he would have lost before, and he would have won at the church. But
yes.
We no longer need to wonder that, because she dead.
But Drolta is now long gone, died to Alucard in his 3 seconds on screen kind of thing.
Now, we'll talk briefly about Alucard, because we don't need to talk too long. He appeared for, a minute. I theorize that the events of Symphony of the Night either weren't going to happen or they were going to get folded into this. Mm-hmm. And now I'm certain of it.
Yeah.
If there is a storyline of Richter getting brainwashed, it's going to be an episode of this show.
Yes.
And then it's going to end and Richter's still going to be the person who beats the big bad. But Alucard does show up again. Same voice actor as before. Looking
Thankfully.
Almost more like the paintings on the Japanese box art than he did before. Still having his sword familiar summon that he can telekinetically control. Came to the scene, murdered the shit out of Drolta, addressed Richter Belmont by name, mentioned that he's in a tough spot and hoping he's not too late. And when I saw that, all I was wondering was, goddamn Alucard, we really needed you half an hour ago.
Yeah, yeah.
Olrox.
Yeah, now oh my god, this oozes charm.
Before you get on it, let me describe what he was like in the games.
Absolutely.
Okay. Olrox was a boss in Symphony of the Night that you often fought later than you were supposed to, but even if you go and fight him when you are supposed to, he's not really that challenging a fight. Mm-mm. As long as you keep your wits about you, you'll kill him, even if you're not cheesing the game. That said, he's kinda cool. He's sitting at a table. You can sit at the opposite side of the table and not engage the fight. And it almost looks like him and Alucard are talking at that point. We don't know anything about his personality until a later radio drama that happens after Dawn of Sorrow, where Olrox is trying to take over Dracula's castle. And he fights death, but is eventually defeated by death. That is a long story, and I'm really giving you the Reader's Digest version of that. We know from that Olrox's personality isn't so much about causing the death of humanity as much as he is testing his own limits. So he's kind of like he enjoyed the fight with Alucard even though he lost. And he enjoyed the fight with Death even though he did lose in the end. He's kind of looking for a good fight in the games. Now in the games, he does have some of the techniques that he showed off in the show here, like summoning the skulls, which he has in the games, and like in the show, you can destroy the skulls. Julia did when she was fighting him. He also, in the games, likes to hover around pointlessly and do nothing sometimes, which he did do in the show. Sometimes he would just hover for no reason. And I'm like, anyone accusing the writers of the show of not playing the games don't know what they're talking about, because they got that one weird aspect of Olrox perfect.
Down.
Why is he just hovering for no reason?
Mm-hmm.
Now, other than that, they did reimagine a lot of his character to be this Aztec vampire with just the most gorgeous hair and voice around. And as someone much more important than he was in Symphony of the Night, as being the man who killed Julia Belmont, Richter's mother, and the man that Richter fears and wants revenge against. Olrox also had a lot more of a complex character than that. It's implied that he only killed Julia because Julia killed someone he loved. And later he tells Mizrak that the man he loved was someone that he turned. And that kind of sets the stage of, was that turn with consent? Was it not? We know that the man Olrox loved was someone who was himself like a fighter and someone who had lofty ideals that Olrox kind of cynically abandoned once that person died, probably by the hands of Julia Belmont. Olrox doesn't seem like he's an entirely evil character, though. We know that he could have offed baby Richter, and he didn't. Yes. He could have offed Richter again later when he gave them the book to stop the infernal machine, and he didn't.
He could have ended all of them.
Yeah, no, he could have killed them many times over. Olrox has his own designs. He kind of stands as a parallel to Dracula in the original series in that the person he loved was killed and he sought revenge. The difference is that he only stopped at the person he needed revenge on and he didn't keep going on a rampage. It's clear he does not approve of Erzsébet at all. He bowed to her, but you saw in his face he did not agree.
Yeah, it wasn't so much a grimace as like he had swallowed something that tasted wrong.
He's also a bit of a detective, right?
Yeah. Like,
he first arrives in France. He's investigating Mizrak, eventually sleeping with him, probably for information. Also partly because he does care about Mizrak.
Yes, we see that later.
He tried to save him, but Mizrak rebuked that because Mizrak himself had betrayed the abbot. We also know that he investigated the infernal machine. He had maybe my favorite bit of dialogue in all of the Castlevania series, which is his dialogue with Edouard, where he starts by saying, "Oh, what extraordinary thing happened here? A human soul?" And he talks to Edouard. The line that ended with Edouard saying he wants his freedom, and Olrox chuckles and says, "Don't we all?" Implying that he himself still feels trapped. So good. Olrox had some of the best lines in this show.
Yeah.
I am over the moon. Olrox is like my favorite character of this whole season.
The voice actor, oh my god. Mm-hmm. Just nailed that. Everything about him.
I apologize. I just wanted to give backstory, and then I was going to let you talk about him, but I started with my own thoughts. Please give me your thoughts on
it's all good. No, I mean, the way he looks just oozes charm.
Yeah. He's got a high charisma stat.
Definitely has a high charisma. I really do appreciate, it's sad he needed to take revenge, but that he stopped shows that he has his moral high grounds that he keeps to.
Yeah, he has a moral code. He has lines he doesn't cross.
I mean, I'm not gonna be able to say he's a good guy.
Oh no, of course not.
But I mean, we were talking a vampire. You don't really get good guy vampires all that much, but I did like everything about his character. The dragon transformation was interesting because that was one thing that was very different from his game appearances.
He does turn into a giant lizard in the games, but it's kind of this humanoid lizard.
Yeah.
Whereas here it's Quetzalcoatl, basically. Yes.
And honestly, if they ever remade Symphony of the Night, I'd want them to use the dragon form because that lizard humanoid thing is just, no, get rid of it.
There is one thing that lizard did that I was hoping I would see this one do, and that's spray a line of fireballs at you. Instead, Quetzalcoatl did lightning, which just visually works better, I think.
Yes, it does. I loved everything about him, and I'm really hoping they don't have him go comic book villain on us in season 2.
No, I'm hoping he's not the big bad, and I'm kind of hoping he doesn't die either.
Yeah. Which is weird for me to say for a vampire.
Right. We can quickly transition into Mizrak.
We probably should, because Mizrak
was not in the game. This is a new character.
Oh, yeah.
One of the Knights of St. John, one of the Abbot's own knightly order. And he was with the abbot's plan until Emmanuel decided he was going to sacrifice Maria, his own daughter. At that point, Mizrak realized he fucked up, went to the heroes, and joined them, basically.
Yeah.
Mizrak stands as the man of God who never shook in his faith, because when he realized he was wrong and he turned, he begged his fellow knights to pray with him, and even begged the abbot, only fighting when he saw they weren't going to turn.
Yeah.
What did you think of Mizrak, Dave?
I can appreciate what the character was doing in the show. I mean, the fact that him and Olrox end up being gay and together and everything else didn't bother me in the least. I liked the fact that
it's good that it didn't bother you. I'm laughing because I think it's funny. It's like they were gay and it didn't bother me. It's like the fact that it needs to be said is
I'm
funny. I'm
glad that they didn't have to spell that out in the show. And
there's no other way they could have spelled it. They were naked beside each other.
What I mean is, you didn't have characters basically, standing there basically shouting, "I'm gay." You showed it.
By the way, I'm gay. Here's my dick.
Yeah.
My big vampire cock.
Anyway, no, that's my feeling on Mizrak. A man challenged by his beliefs in both God and his abbot, and so far only one of those failed him.
He seemed his faith is the one that didn't really falter. It seemed like it came close.
He did have blind faith, which is a problem in itself.
Mm-hmm.
But at least once he got slapped in the face with just how bad things had gone, he finally woke the fuck up.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. His morality won in the end, right? Whereas the abbots arguably didn't.
No.
Let's talk about the abbot.
Let's talk about the abbot.
What did you think of Abbot Emmanuel, Dave?
Again, the voice actor, perfect job.
This so-called revolution is an abomination. Yeah, great.
Like, I bought everything he was saying. Like, I bought his intentions. I didn't agree with them, but I got where he was going with, during the French Revolution, a lot of the clergy were executed for not being on board with what the revolution was going with. And that's churches were destroyed and burned down and everything else as being in the way.
That's an ugly side of the revolution, because the issue, the whole reason the revolution happened and why we're still not shaking off its side effects, even today, is because it was about class society and money and wealth and capital. And ultimately, a lot of religious practitioners and even a lot of people who did have wealth weren't guilty of keeping this system going, right? But they were executed all the same. And this is the thing that the abbot feared, I feel.
Well, and let's face it, churches and money go together.
They do.
Because even if you have a church which is purely supported by the funding of its members, money is the only thing that keeps them eating and the church open. And
which is not something that I fault them for as evil, because we don't live in a world where we can go without that.
And not exactly where I was going with it, but, and I mean, don't get me wrong, like, this church looks like it's pretty, it's not a rich church kind of thing. It's not, you don't have a gold globes and everything else here, there, on leather seats. Like, it's wooden pews. It's a very original church. But it just, churches and money go together, and that leads to a lot of corruption. And that's part of why when he started spouting off his whole, the revolution's wrong, and, yes, they're burning down churches and executing clergy and everything else, but you also have to remember that a lot of these clergymen were in the hands of these rich individuals, which helped control these towns. So,
sure, and this is part of the complication, because they were throwing all of them to the gallows and to the guillotine blades.
When
it needed more, there needed to be a bit more understanding of the real guilty parties, right?
It was, you're either with the revolution or you're not with the revolution. If you're not with the revolution, die. And that...
And to be fair, there were revolutionaries who were not like that.
Yes.
It's just that from the perspective of some people who didn't see where the problems were, they see it, the revolution as evil. So the abbot is a very complex character because he did all these evil things with the best of intentions. Even his attempt to sacrifice Maria, he did because he genuinely thought that this sacrifice meant she would be secured in heaven and would be spared any of the ugliness that would be happen on Earth. When she learned that Elizabeth wanted to turn into a vampire, he was horrified by that.
Yet still was kind of willing to go through it.
Not with Maria. He wasn't going to do that with Maria. The only reason he went through with it is because Tara offered herself in Maria's place. So when the abbot said he loved her, it was because he did love Tara, but he was trying to save Maria. That's why he was so heartbroken when he told Drolta, "You're not going to let them go, are you?" He wanted Maria and also Richter and Mizrak and Annette to be spared the wrath because he genuinely didn't want them to die. He knows they're good people. So I suspect there's a redemption in the future of the abbot, but it's going to come through death. I think somehow Tara is cured of her condition, but it's going to need a sacrifice, and it's going to be him.
Yeah, no, he's not going to survive the series. That's guaranteed.
If you look at the art of Shaft in Symphony of the Night, his face looks a lot like Abbot Emmanuel, albeit in much more ritual death priest garb. Yeah. I don't know if that was intentional and the abbot is meant to be this world's version of Shaft, or if it just happens to be a bit of inspiration, or he's an entirely original character.
Yeah.
But I felt it was worth mentioning.
Yeah, no, it is. I have very complex issues when it comes to religion and how it's shown in media and comparing it to real world. So I appreciate everything they did with his character in this season, as well as even, the blind loyalty of his subordinates. It very much mimics how religion can work in those sort of situations.
I don't think religious beliefs are evil.
Nope.
I don't think religious people are inherently evil. I think the problem is that organized religion can be evil when it is under the yoke of money and influence and power structure, basically. And I think the abbot legitimately thought he was doing the best he possibly could to preserve his faith and the people. And it ended up blowing up in his face. And I think he's going to have, as Steve Austin would say, a come to Jesus moment. Which is a funny thing for him. I think the last character to discuss before we get to other thoughts on the show is a character I did not expect we were going to see ever animated in any show ever, and that is Juste Belmont.
That was funny.
Juste Belmont, as Iga originally said his name was pronounced, although Juste is the more correct pronunciation for that spelling. Juste Belmont is the hero of Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance, which is, in my humble opinion, the worst Castlevania game. It is a Metroidvania game. The second one Iga worked on after Symphony of the Night, although the third one after both Symphony and Circle of the Moon. Juste Belmont is Simon Belmont's grandson, and the story of that game is that he was a very powerful Belmont who also had very strong sorcery powers from his Belnatus bloodline. And his friend Maxim had told him that their friend and Juste's love, Liddy, was kidnapped by someone who's in a castle. We later learn in that game's plot that Maxim had attempted to gather the pieces of Dracula to resurrect him and kill him, just like Simon did, the legendary Simon Belmont, but that Dracula had taken over his soul when that happened. Long story short, Juste saves Maxim and Liddy and banishes an early resurrected Dracula once more. Just is Richter's grandfather in the games, but there is never any interaction because by the time Richter comes around, I'm pretty sure Just is long dead. He's not dead here. He's an old man. And he's still alive. And he has a role to play still. I wish we had seen a flashback of when he was in his awesome red coat blasting guys with sorcery because he canonically was a powerful sorcerer.
Yep.
Based off the trailers of season 2, we're going to see more on him.
Cool.
It is cool that we got to see him at all, to be honest with you. And the fact that he was kind of the catalyst for Richter reawakening his powers and that we're not done with Just is really interesting. And again, showing that these writers played the games. In Harmony of Dissonance, when you walk with Just, he has a bit of an afterimage to help you see him on the Game Boy Advance screen. He had that afterimage when he first took the whip and he went to go kill that vampire. So they absolutely knew what they were doing with this character. And it was just a surprise to see this character show up. And I hope that we get to see him get his sorcery back too.
Like I loved when he was commenting about how heavy the whip was. He had forgotten the weight of the whip. Yeah. And he's not just talking about the physical weight.
Nope. He's still good with it. He obliterated the shit out of that vampire.
I also appreciate that when the vampires had him all tied up in chains,
he could have gotten out at any point.
He just basically lifted his arm and got out on his own. It's like, you could have done that at any time.
He was waiting for the opportunity. Yep. He saw the moment Richter woke up, okay, here's my chance, and now I can grab the whip and help.
And he did.
Yeah.
Oh, and the fear that was in that one vampire's eyes, the one with the gun that they took out at the end. I love that because, he's so self-confident. And then all of a sudden, he's trying to shoot Richter and he just can't get.
It's not working on this.
It's not working.
This man is burning the water, my friend. You are not winning this fight.
So he runs and then gets captured by the whip, pulled back down, and it's just like, oh, God, yeah.
It was so good. And they were playing Richter's theme
from
Rondo on top of everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. That was some good shit. More to see from Just. I hope we see a flashback and we get to see some Harmony of Dissonance animation, because despite me hating the game, I would still like to see its events or some version of them put to screen, even if it's a quick flashback.
Yeah.
What else is there to discuss with Castlevania Nocturne?
I definitely...
Richter did not use Hydrostorm even once.
No.
We all know he could have beaten Erzsébet in just 2 or 3 castings of it, if even just one. But he didn't use it. 0 out of 10 show. Actually, I saw someone on Reddit say their criticism of the show is that he never used Hydrostorm. And I was thinking to myself, Guy, that is the best criticism I've heard so far.
Fair enough.
And someone else is like, he didn't even use his cross. Like, good shit. These are the criticisms I like to see.
No, I mean, the setting is very well done. It's interesting to see just after Castlevania's season 1 through 4. You kind of got the idea, the feeling that a good amount of the vampire hierarchy had been wiped out. But, I mean, it's only a couple hundred years later kind of thing. And society is dominated by vampirism again. So, it shows both that, vampires were never going away, but also that mankind was quite willing to give up their humanity to become vampires.
Yeah, vampirism is a part of this world's, ecology now, right? This is an alternate history. Castlevania always has been an alternate history.
Yeah, but even then, you used to be able to kind of justify how the events of the Castlevania could have happened in real world. Mm-hmm. This is totally gone.
Yeah, no, all of France is being attacked by vampires. It's kind of like how in Helsing, the Zeppelin fucking obliterated London, and there was a massacre of an entire city.
Yep.
Yeah, we can't hide this, guys.
Nope. Nope.
A slightly different Alucard.
Yeah.
I have a theory about Erzsébet, and I don't think she's going to be the big bad.
Okay.
Erzsébet in this show is also Sekhmet, an ancient deity, or at least she thinks she's Sekhmet. Mm-hmm. There was an Egyptian deity that you fought in the games. Now, Olrox, in a conversation with Mizrak, was talking about the Infernal Machine, the abbot's presumably his Forge Master tool is this machine.
Yeah.
And because he had kind of a Necronomicon-esque book about it, I either assume that the abbot made this book to summon the machine, or he contracted a demon, because Olrox says as much, that it's a machine from hell, and he asks what demon collects his price when all this is done.
Yeah.
And he tells Mizrak that there's some demons you can bargain with, some demons used to be gods, and some still are.
Yes.
Now, that is not a throwaway line as far as I'm concerned.
No.
There are demon gods.
Yeah.
There is one demon god in particular, one god of the underworld, who has tried to usurp Dracula's throne and actively murder Dracula more than once. You fight him a couple of times in the series. Once in Kid Dracula, and the other in Symphony of the Night. He is the hardest boss in the game. He's completely optional. He's in the floating catacombs. His name is Galamoth. Do you remember Galamoth?
Yes.
Galamoth was, unless you had the thing that absorbed lightning, you were in for a hard fight. Or unless you had like a Valmanway or two, or the Alucard shield. If you were trying to fight him conventionally, he was the only boss in that game that might kick your ass. And not even talk about when you fight him with Richter or Maria, who have to use certain tricks to even get past them. Galamoth is an interesting character because he was the big villain behind that really garbage Castlevania fighting game, Castlevania Judgment, because he was trying to obliterate the entire, millennium that Dracula existed in from the future, even though you never see Galamoth straight up, he's mentioned.
Yeah.
But Galamoth you see in Symphony of the Night. And like Dracula, it's presumed he can revive over and over. Galamoth is based off ancient Egyptian deities, such as the Anubis, for example. I suspect the demon who is going to collect his price is, since we don't have a Dracula to be the big bad, unless he's still alive somewhere in God Evil again, I suspect the next best choice would be Galamoth. I think we have a Galamoth reveal, and I think Galamoth is going to take the role from Erzsébet and going to be the big bad that ultimately the heroes need to defeat before all is said and done. That's my wild theory.
I think we're going to see Dracula back,
You
but
think?
not as the bad guy. I think we're going to see the same Dracula from the first series.
Is he going to be in disguise, do you think?
Probably in disguise.
What's his disguise going to be? Is it going to be a member of the Cruz family? Because in the game, Soma Cruz was his reincarnation.
That would be a really good link to the games, absolutely. But I could see Dracula being the one who actually does take out Elizabeth.
Erzsébet.
Yeah.
Erzsébet Bathroy.
I could see Dracula being the one to do it. Because by this point, unless he turned his wife, she would be dead again.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think he'd go into his insanity a second time of her dying of old age kind of thing. I'd hope he would have gotten past that phase. But him being, kind of a world-wide explorer, taking out the worst of his kind, I could totally see him taking that on like his son has. Perhaps
we still have to see him. I think even if we don't see him alive, we're going to learn what his fate was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I don't think that fate's going to be a mob killed him and his wife.
Mm-hmm.
Not a second time.
We also don't know what happened with Striga and her girlfriend, whose name I don't remember. Striga was the vampire who had the solar berserk armor and who chopped up all those farmers in that scene that the animators really were hoping the people who animated Berserk would have seen. She still lived, as did her girlfriend, and presumably there's some role they have to play as well. We might still see them. Maybe they're still active in the world somewhere. Maybe they don't like no vampire messiah either.
I'd also like to learn what ended up happening with the Belmont hold and the castle.
I think we're going to get that for sure.
Because either the town they built continued and became basically Treffy, yeah. Either Treffy continued on and became the new Belmont clan and vampire hunters and everything else, or they were wiped out and the castle still got a part to play in this series as well.
I suspect that has become a whole city of some kind of stronghold, or it's fallen into ruin, hopefully not, because it would be nice for them to have a repository of knowledge. Though if they travel there, rest assured, it's going to come under attack from Urzabet. Here's hoping, though, that it's filled to burst with vampire hunters capable of defending it.
Yeah, like, seeing as we've got Alucard here, I'd like to think that Alucard, also settled down and was able to have a family.
Maybe, but that one dynasty girl definitely seemed like she was interested in him.
Like, you hope to find out little things like that, and that, his life wasn't just hunting vampires and staying away from people.
It would be a happier fate than he had in the games, where after Symphony of the Night, after Castlevania 3, he sealed himself away thinking he was cursed. And then he was going to seal himself away, but presumably Maria got through to him. We see him again in the Sorrow games, helping Soma as Genya Arikado.
Yeah.
Which is also an alias that Dracula could use in this if they wanted to introduce him as having an alias.
Yeah. Well, I mean, is that someplace they're going to go in this? Is Maria going to end up with Alucard like she does in the games?
Let's give her a few years first. I think Alucard look, I get that no one's going to stop you, but you should stop yourself for a few years. Let her develop a little more into the Symphony of the Night version of herself, at least.
No, that's fair enough.
Yeah.
I mean, we could actually end up with a time skip.
No, we could. We could end up with a time skip. Urzabet's beaten, but some other big bad is working in the shadows. Time skip. We have Richter looking like his Symphony of the Night outfit.
Yeah.
Maria in her Symphony of the Night outfit.
Of course, we can't end up with a time skip between Season 1 and Season 2. Because, again...
No, we're kind of in the middle of shit.
We're not just in the middle of shit. If you go a couple years, you're talking... The whole world would be an ice scape, everything else. Like, that whole humanity dying out would happen.
We don't know how much of the world is covered by the eclipse, though. We don't know if it's just localized to France, or if it's literally the whole world is now enshrouded in darkness. It was implied the world.
Okay.
I just think we need to see.
There's something on that, though.
Mm-hmm.
If the moon is covering the sun right now, and as they say that she was making it stay like that, if the eclipse is happening where we are, it's also happening everywhere.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
It's a solar eclipse. It blocks the sun.
Yeah, fair enough. You're right.
So,
I just didn't know if the moon was going to get in place before it hit France, and then... No, you're right. It's probably affecting the world, so...
In fact... That would have been a smarter idea, is if they had a way to make it just cover a country. Well, now you've got your vampire utopia, but then you couldn't use the moon. You'd have to use like an asteroid or something that would literally be the shape of a...
Or just have an underground city.
Well, underground cities are another thing that you could absolutely do. I mean, Vampire Hunter D use those liberally.
Lots of vampire fiction where vampires coexist with humanity and aren't trying to kill them.
Yes.
That use ways that vampires and humans work together and include technologies to keep vampires from bursting into flame at daybreak, right? So,
yeah. Big
weakness, though.
Yes.
Folks, what did you think of Castlevania Nocturne? Let us know either on our website, animerave.xyz, or leave a comment on this video. We are Carl's Name Anime Rave. We are the best anime review and reaction show on the internet. We have won awards from the Plaza of Fine Artistic Review videos and such.
Tune in next time.
Goodbye.